Hi, and welcome to the questionably authoritative video on adventure travel or dual sport travel in northern Alberta, British Columbia, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and parts of Alaska. Me and my son took a trip this summer that had us gone, I believe we were 21 or 22 days, and we covered 10,000 kilometers on the two bikes to my left and right here. And we recorded it as an adventure. We've released some episodes, but I have decided to turn it into a feature-length film, so I wanted to include a little bit of an intro. Just to glue together a little bit that I missed out. It is a short intro, so if anybody has any ideas for places that we can go that are not included in this video, please feel free to include them. We are going back up in about 18 months. I will be taking my daughter where I will be probably still on the 300 unless something major changes, and she will be on her Versus 300. So we are modifying the trip a little bit to be a little more suitable for that bike. But always looking for new things that we missed. I hope that anybody that's doing trip planning or just wants to take a tour through the north, that you can take these notes, that they're valuable for you. I try to include a lot of locations, kilometers, places to stay, things to avoid, things to think about. And I think that it's a relatively complete guide. It was not my first time in the north, so I do have a little bit of experience with this, and I hope that I'm able to share that with you in a way that helps you in the future, or at least gives you a trip to the north that you might not ever get to do yourself. So thanks for joining me, and I appreciate the support that everybody's given me through the summer with this one, and I look forward to putting out more videos over the next year, or the years to come. So thanks, and we'll talk to you later. For those of you that missed the announcements, this is episode 1 of Small Bore Big Adventures. What happens when you take your son 9,176 kilometers on small bore motorcycles all the way from central Alberta to the Arctic Ocean, Alaska, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. Now, if you'll oblige me, this is a framework episode, so we're going to cover context. This is our map of where we went. This is actually my tracker. Now, if you notice, 2 provinces, 2 territories, and 1 state. Twice. Because we really liked it. This episode will be mostly just film running in the background. I will talk a little bit about the clips, but this is about setting the framework for the trip because I have a lot of footage, almost 900 gigabytes worth, to cut through, and there are some great sub-adventures within this. So I wanted to spend one episode where we basically just fly along and I explain to you what this is going to be like over the next 5 to 7 episodes, I'm thinking probably. 900 gigabytes is a lot of footage, so we're going to see how it goes, but I hope to present only things that I would watch again, and that hopefully is a high enough bar that you all can enjoy this as well. Well, first thing we have to cover is the why. Now, going to the north, in my opinion, is something that we should all do. However, just going there is not really that new of an adventure for me. What is new about this is taking my son there. He's never been north of Grand Prairie, which, for those of you that aren't Albertan, is not really far north. It's arguably not that south. But why the north? Well, the north holds a special place in my heart. I've spent a significant portion of my career as an aircraft maintenance engineer working in the middle north and the high north, as well as some international locations. But I've spent a lot of time up here. And for a lot of the years when my kids were younger, I was gone, and I'd always talked about stories of these places. And early on, when they were about 8 or 10 years old, I talked to my 2 younger children and said that when they turned 18, that we would take a motorcycle trip up to this area so they can see where I'd been all of those years. And so here we are. My son James just turned 18, just graduated, and why not take a 3-week-long adventure with your dad? We're still on talking terms, so we could probably do it, right? Secondly, why did we take small bore dual sports, not big adventure bikes? Well, partly because I enjoy doing things like this, illogical, irrational, and arguably the butt end of a lot of jokes. But realistically, as we found out in the course of this trip, or more specifically James found out, they actually are very well suited to this type of travel. In the north, everything goes on northern times, which means you arrive when you arrive, but it's best arriving in one piece, and having 10 or 12 inches of suspension and a light bike is of great value. Now, as we met people as we were going up in the south, we were the butt end of a little bit of jokes and a little bit of sneering, in all honesty, of people that really felt that our bikes were ill-suited to this adventure. As we got further and further north, that turned into a little bit of envy. There were a lot of people with some big bikes that very much wished and were quite open about the fact that they wished they had gone on smaller bikes. There are some compromises to be made, but honestly, this is a way better idea than you think it is, and I'm going to be super happy to share this with you over the course of the next 5 to 7 episodes. Now, we were gone for 23 nights. Of the 23 nights, we tented 22 of the nights. I think it'll be probably about episode 4. We're going to talk about the one night we did not tent, and all the things that can go wrong when you're using an app up in the north that you don't have data for, and maybe has less than reliable information. But 22 nights we tented, which means that we had everything that we need for camping on these bikes. Now, there's 2 episodes on my channel that cover our bike builds. I hopefully will do one at the end once I pick myself up off the ground. That was brought to you by Tim. Tim told me that I would crash twice on this trip. And I said, oh, of course not. I'm not going to crash. I'm on a road bike, and we're just doing easy gravel roads and stuff. It'd be utterly ridiculous to crash on this bike. But thanks to Tim bringing it up, I did in fact crash twice, and I broke 2 things, one of them being my jet boil. So thanks, Tim. I'm hoping at the conclusion of these videos, because I am quite excited to start sharing these, that I'll also do a video about what we carried for camping gear. We've kind of refined it over the last couple of years, but I think we found a really good balance of value versus quality. And honestly, I think it's a reasonably good setup for people to copy or to work off of, and I'd be interested to see what people have to say about it. Now, at this point, I can reasonably say with pretty good data that our gear held up really well. We were gone 23 days. We had 5 days total without rain. Now, that doesn't mean that we were rained on the entirety of all of the other days, but we had everything from rain to lightning to hail twice, and even threatened snowfall once. So this gear has been battle tested. James there in this picture, my son, this is his first mega adventure, and he took it like a champ. That was a lot to ask of somebody. I think we averaged about 500 kilometers a day. On our riding days. We did take 3 days break for rest days and a little bit of maintenance that needed to be done just on the preventative style. But overall, I think that we can definitively say that our gear held up really well in this trip. But now, with the rough context being done, let's get on to some storytelling. Now, I feel compelled to always tell these stories in a chronological sense. So obviously at the beginning of the clips, we're on the flatland prairies, or as I believe it's parkland. Then we get into Jasper, which honestly is beautiful. The Eastern Rockies, or the Eastern Slopes, grandiose mountain, 10,000 feet. And then we ended up in the Highland interior, which honestly it's kind of neat. There were some lakelands and so on. But then we decided to go down. Once we turned on the Stewart Highway at Mazaidan Junction, we headed west to go to the coast into Stewart, BC, as somebody had suggested it. Absolutely stunning road. I believe it's only about 60 kilometers long from Mazaidan Junction to the coast, which goes to Stewart and Hyder, Alaska. Now, it's interesting because this trip took us through so many different biomes. We are on day 5, I believe, or day 4 on this trip, and we have already been through 5 distinct biomes. Now, we did cover a lot of miles, but it was just amazing how quickly everything shifted. What we have here is, I believe, temperate rainforest, but it's kind of got just a grandiose Lord of the Rings-esque vibe. Not quite as dry as Lord of the Rings, it's a little bit wetter. But it was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. Now, obviously, the rain was on and off through the day, but it kind of added to the dark mood of the place. This is in Stewart. It was funny. It was Canada Day while we were here, and I go up to this restaurant, Toastworks, I believe is the name, where it was the only place that seemed open in town, and I really wanted some fish and chips. So I go into this place, and Toastworks is a Argentinian restaurant, because of course it is. That makes total sense. Why would you have just a normal fish and chips place on the ocean in a fishing village? It's cool, pretty neat. It has all kinds of old toasters and stuff on the wall there, and a really cool vibe to it. The service was interesting. Everything was handmade, from the tortillas and so on. But I asked the woman that owned this place, I said, do you have any fish and chips? And she said, no, we do not have fish and chips. We have Argentinian food. And I'm like, well, do you have anything made with local fish? Because we're on the ocean. And she's like, no, we ship it all back from Argentina. And that just struck me as infinitely funny. It was great, like super awesome. These little mahi-mahi tacos But it was really weird to be doing that in Stewart, BC. Why can't I just get some nice halibut? That would have been great. This was a great road to ride. Super curvy. There was a little bit of a construction on it, but overall the condition of the road was a little bit bumpy, but pretty good for our bikes. And the overall mood of this ride was just amazing. We did come across the glacier, as you saw earlier in the video there. I believe that is the Bear Glacier. But the waterfalls that were continuously falling, I mean, we're kind of midsummer here, so it should be a little bit of spring runoff. There was some snow down to our level as the road is quite high. But the clouds just added just this majestic mood to it. And the green, it just popped. I know these cameras kind of play around with the color a little bit, but honestly, this is pretty close representation. It was just amazing to see. I love waterfalls. I love lakes. Love rivers. But this area, it instantly goes up to probably a top 8 places in Canada that I've been to for beauty. It'd be interesting to go through when it's full sky blue to see if it would feel any different, whether the clouds kind of added to that, the mood to make it more special or not. But it was also I believe this is day 4, it was also the 4th straight day of rain. So we were pretty soaking wet. Maybe that helped the mood, maybe it didn't. Here we are going north, back onto the Stewart Highway, where we ended up at Dease Lake at the end of the day. And that's really where the adventure starts. The Stewart was kind of unexpected, but as we come to the end of this video, the next segment of this video will be Telegraph Creek in the north part of the Stewart Cassiar, and this for me is where the adventure really begins. So I am just hyper excited to share this. It was a very special time with me and my son doing all kinds of cool stuff, going to cool places that most of you probably never heard of, or maybe you have heard of them and it's just you're poking in. But I think that there will be a lot of good footage here, and I'm hoping to provide a little bit of story, a little bit of history with this area over what was just an absolutely amazing trip over 23 days with my son, and really couldn't have asked for any more. So until next video, we'll sign off. Hopefully it'll be about a week to 2 weeks before the next video will come out, but this will be a little bit of a journey for us. So thanks a lot for joining. Episode 2 of Arctic Ocean via the Dempster Highway and all other remote places. This is where the adventure really begins. Telegraph Creek and staging for the Canol Highway. Now that we've got all the details out of the way, we can get to the real meat of this. Telegraph Creek, there's a couple of things you need to know. Grades up to 20%, steep mountain road. It's also got this interesting sign here that I can't say that I've seen anywhere else. Maybe somebody can tell me what it means. Debris flow hazard. I don't even know what that means. I'm pretty sure that has to do with rocks flowing, but you'll figure out that there's a lot of dangers on this highway pretty quickly. Keep in mind that we aren't doing this as a race trip. We are simply cruising and exploring beautiful British Columbia, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Alaska, and parts of Alberta. So enjoy the scenery, and we'll go through some history and kind of some of the trip that we've done so far. So where is Telegraph Creek, and why should I care? That's 2 important questions that we need to answer here. The where, that's relatively easy. This is northwestern BC. And by northwestern, I mean north-northwestern, and western, north-northwestern BC. It's up against the ocean, 120 kilometers west off of the Stewart Cassiar Highway, with an entry point near Dease Lake. Now, before some geography nerd pokes their head in here and says, hey, it's not really against the ocean, first off, you're never going to out-nerd me on geography. It's just not going to happen. Secondly, open up Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever geography you prefer to use, draw a line straight south out of Telegraph Creek and tell me how many hundreds of kilometers it is west of Vancouver, and then tell me that it's not close to the ocean. It's close to the ocean, you just can't see it from here. Now, beyond the history that we're going to talk about a little bit later, what makes this area unique? Well, the highway that comes into this area kind of follows between the Stikine and the Tuya River. The Tuya River is the one on the left here, and then we are meeting up in the next couple of seconds here up against that mountain ledge or the cliff edge with the Stikine River. Now, what's really neat about this, other than the fact that this is where I discovered that you can make macaroni and cheese in a jet boil, and it tastes pretty good even without butter, is that underneath this rock face where you're going to see what looks like kind of a gigantic eagle with its wings spread out. You'll also see in the water that they're 2 different colors. Now, on the far side of the river is the Stikine River, and the Tuya River is on the closer side. But this is where the water meets, and it forms into quite a large river. this whole area, you're crossing back and forth across the river and coming to these ridges where the road is made up alongside either the cliffside or where the cliff meets between the rivers, and it's regionally known as the Grand Canyon. Obviously not the Grand Canyon, but it's not hard to see why it is. There are some really tall cliff sides. It is just under 1,000 feet down to the river at the higher points. Obviously you do cross back and forth, but that's what makes the 20% grade. This road's super cool. It's also got gates on both sides because if it gets wet, you get super dead. So maybe pay attention to those gates when you're there. What's also neat about this is all of the different rock formations. This area is volcanic. The Tahltan people, which are the First Nations that inhabit this area, or one of the First Nations that are well known for their work with obsidian that can be found locally here. So if anybody has anything that they can teach me about this, I would be super keen on knowing. There's just so much neat formation. You see down there on the right hand of the screen, that's my son James, the second member of this journey, checking out that kind of rock formation at the bottom. It's just very unique. Now here we are in the town. According to Wiki, there are 56 people that live in Telegraph Creek at this point. Used to be a major hub. It kind of came to be as a town. I mean, obviously the First Nations were there significantly before the Telegraph was, but it came to be in the 1850s and 60s during the Stikine and the Cassiar gold rush. Telegraph Creek obviously isn't gold, but it was also meant to be the staging area or one of the connector points for the Russo or Russian-American telegraph line, which we'll circle back to in a minute or two, because I need to give everybody about a 10-second warning that there is going to be an exceptional kind of moment. So, prepare yourselves and just take yourself out of the history lesson. We saw a baby wolf, or I did anyway. James got a little bit too far ahead and didn't quite see it, though he might have seen it. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask him. Anyhow, 10-second warning's over. There's a baby wolf. So we stopped, took a picture. I'm pretty sure it's a wolf. I don't think it's a coyote. It's definitely not a fox, as far as I can tell. Black. But I stopped and I wanted to take a better look and better picture because I just had to work off the video. But then I remembered that baby wolves are often accompanied by larger wolves, and they probably don't have a sense of humor about that, and I don't want to get ate. So here we are. So with that, we can circle back to our history lesson and things that really should have been obvious at that time, much like the mama wolf, baby wolf scenario. They tried to run a telegraph line from California all the way to Moscow. Now, those of you that know geography will know that there's an ocean between those, and not only an ocean, you got the Bering Sea, or the Beaufort, depending on where you start. But anybody that spent time up there like me knows, rowdy place. You do not cross that. So they encountered some problems that really, they said were unforeseen, but they either didn't have smart people or they weren't really unforeseen and it just didn't turn out. There's another thing on the right there where you notice that the road washed away. That's part of the wet has the gates down scenarios that I was talking about earlier. Now I'll joke a little bit about the conditions on the road, but in all fairness, we're on light dual sports. We're both experienced riders and we're set up quite well for this type of travel, so it is relatively safe. But obviously, no guardrails. Now this section you would have seen going the other way, but I think it's significant and it's something I kind of wanted to point out. Now it's not the 1,000-foot section going down, but I don't know, say it looks like 400 or 500 feet down, and it's the Tuya River on the left and the Stikine River on the right, and it's one of my favorite areas to ride in. I don't know if it's a top 10, but it's definitely top 20 and fairly experienced rider. So it's like I've seen a lot of cool stuff, and this always amazes me every time I go here. It's just a beautiful thing. I don't know whether they filled in the gaps along the top or whether it was just a plateau that just happens to go straight down. It seems really odd that it'd be that narrow because it really is straight down on both sides, but just absolutely beautiful place. Now, unfortunately, I didn't want to make a 20 or 30 minute long video on this. I really could have with the amount of footage that we had and just the relative beauty in the area. But before moving on to the second part of this video with the connection going up towards Ross River where we're staging for the Canol Highway, I really wanted to send a thank you to the Tahltan people that both maintain and open up this land. It is Indigenous territory. I think there's 3 bands in the area, but they were very, very friendly, very helpful people, and I did want to highlight you will see in the video there that there was a pretty significant forest fire damage in there. It's a it's a good reminder of how difficult it can be to live in remote conditions. We did have some good stories with a lady that lived in Jade City there, which I'd love to share, but don't think it's the appropriate format for it. But it involved a helicopter ride, super low, and not being able to hold your lunch, or other fluids. Now, I'd only known the lady for about 5 minutes when she told me the story about being evacuated, so I'm pretty sure that she's fine with sharing it. But if you ever get to Jade City, ask her about it. It's an entertaining story. She's a pretty good storyteller. Jade City's kind of a neat place. We camped off to the left there in the trees. The family that runs the Cassiar Mountain Jade store, they are very friendly. They have a free campground there off to the left. And then they have coffee that they can serve you on the inside. It's kind of neat seeing the jade everywhere because it's just laying there, gigantic rock, jade. I always assumed that you had to dig deeper for it. Lots of cool old mining equipment, and what's neat about this is that it hasn't been picked over for parts. There was some really, I wouldn't say authentic because it's original. It's just neat to see old equipment that just kind of just came to a rest there. It's done, but they curate it quite nicely, and it just sits there. But so from leaving Jade Creek, or Jade City, we headed north. We finished the Stewart Cassiar Highway. Absolutely stunning. It's take the Stewart Cassiar. It's a beautiful alternative to the Alaskan Highway. Offers you lots of neat places, lots of neat history. This is just an old mining station that was just outside Jade City. You had to go kind of up on a side road. We were told on our maps that it would be a ghost city, but it looks like they are trying to reclaim it and moving a lot of that equipment around. The lakes up in this area, there's lots of high mineralization lakes. It doesn't show up well on a normal camera, although you can see it a little bit. Just absolutely stunningly blue and teal lakes. You can see different shades of it as the depth changes, but there's James and our two little bikes. Sitting next to the lake, but we got a chance to sit by a few. Unfortunately, early in the trip, we did have to cover a lot of miles, so we didn't get to stop as much as we should. But here's another area that's been hit by a forest fire. If you go back and you watch my video from 12, 13 years ago there, this was entirely forested, and that is something that's going to come up a lot in our videos. It is not hard to see why we have been smoked out the last couple of years. This area has been devastated, and it's not just the Stewart Cassiar. Here's James. Behaving entirely reasonably. He discovered during the trip that you can relax with your legs on the safari tank. It actually turned out to be quite comfortable for him. So he enjoyed stretching out a little bit. And here we are crossing north of Watson Lake. We are headed down the Campbell Highway, which, for those of you taking field notes, it is the first 100 kilometers out of Watson Lake north. It connects from Watson Lake to Carmacks, but the first 100 kilometers is paved, and after that there is a ton of gravel, although admittedly extraordinarily well-conditioned gravel, so it's quite an easy ride. But it brings us to kind of an interesting problem we encountered on it. I don't know the exact mileage, but we were somewhere around 300 and some kilometers in towards Ross River, and there is nothing between Watson Lake and Ross River, where we staged for the Canol Highway. But our bikes, we can go roughly 500 kilometers between fills, about 350 off the tanks, and then we have bladders that get us another 150. But there was no signs or anything on this road warning us that this highway was closed or that there was a forest fire. Now, I am familiar enough with the forest fire situations to know that there are apps that you can look, but the last time I had checked, it wasn't showing up. It wasn't active anymore, but the road was closed when we got there, and we were significantly past the point where we could make it back to Watson Lake. So we could have sat there and waited and hoped that somebody eventually went 300 kilometers down a road that doesn't have a single object on it. Or, as you can see here, we can try to push through. Now, thankfully, there was no large smoke billowing off of it, so I was fairly confident that it was in the late stages, but it is super not something that I recommend. This was a moment of, I wouldn't call it desperation, but we just didn't really have an alternative. We had to go through because we could not make it back to Watson Lake with the fuel that we had, and there was a very low level of confidence that somebody would be coming in the next couple of days there. The road that we had traveled on, there was nobody on it. We were one of the only travelers. But it does take us to Ross River, where we staged for the Canol Highway, which honestly super fun. So we're going to have a really great time on the next video. Making for that. There's me pointing out the campground that I totally drove by. But until next time, and the Canol Highway, which honestly, it's super excited to share this with you. So Thanks for being along, and we'll see you in the next video. So for many of you, this will be the first time you've heard of the Canol Road. By the end, you'll have a little bit of history and you realize how important and how mysterious and amazing this place is. I'll start with the job description that was given out by Betchell, Price and Callahan in 1942 when they were looking for people to build this road. Now keep in mind that this is the soft sell, so it was probably worse than this. This is no picnic. Working and living conditions on this job are as difficult as those encountered on any construction job ever done in the United States or foreign territory. Men hired for this job will be required to work and live under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Temperatures will vary from 90 above zero to 70 below zero. Men will have to fight swamps, rivers, ice and cold. Mosquitoes, flies, gnats will not only be annoying but will actually cause you bodily harm. If you are not prepared to work under these or similar conditions, do not apply. Keeping in mind that that's the soft sell. And this was the soft sell being given to the engineers, the Army engineers, and the road builders that have been building the Alaskan Highway over the last couple of years, not the muffin-like adventure riders that you're journeying along with. Now, there isn't a lot of information about this road because, quite honestly, it was only used for about 18 months, despite the fact that it was an enormous undertaking. But they closed it down in 1945 for a reason we'll discuss in a minute. But the general feelings about it and whether it was a success or failure could be summed up by the Undersecretary of War for the United States, Robert P. Peterson, in 1945, saying, "I suppose that we must now bow to the verdict that the project was useless and a waste of public funds." But honestly, that's kind of like a siren's call for me. I get to boast waste funds, do something useless, and go to the north. So honestly, it was what drew me into this area. Now, I'm going to make an obscure reference here to my good old buddy Vizzini from The Princess Bride, but this is once again one of the classic blunders. Never get involved in a land war in Asia, and never think that you can control the north and build roadways through it. Seriously, look at a map and see how many times we've successfully done that. And then you take the people that have taken that roadway and you set them on this, and even they wanted no business to do with this after the road was completed. So as my final criticism of this project and how silly it really was, I will quote a unnamed critic from the time in 1945 who calls this, and I will sanitize it so it's a little more respectful, a junkyard moment to stupidity, which honestly it's a little bit hard to argue with. This whole area has been turned into a little bit of a memorialization of the time period and for how difficult life and travel and exploration is in the north. Very shortly here you'll start to see some relics that lay alongside the road. Now we'll talk a little bit more about it later on when we get to the actual heritage site, but there's two places along the road on the Yukon side that have these vehicle dumps where, like, again, as a testament to how difficult this place is, when they finished, they just left stuff, all the equipment, all the trucks. It was immensely hard to get it out. These red cones here bring up the second danger. You can see a little bit on the right-hand side there as it washes out, and here again on the right-hand side. There were some places that were marked along this road, some places that were not. Now, we drove it in bad weather. We did get some sunshine, as you'll see here, but it was really truncated by that we did a lot of this in the rain. But the road, it is being used for a little bit of mining exploration at the Niktung mine, and I believe that there might be a cobalt mine up in there as well, but I'm not sure. The roadway had these weird washouts, some that are more the classics, like the road just pushes through, but they also had these cavern-like holes in it where there was, somewhere around a foot wide hole at the top, which would be a little abrupt on a bike, but when you look down into them, they would go down, 2 or 3 or 4 feet, and they would open up like a cauldron, and I have no idea. Well, actually, I do have a little bit of an idea of what causes them. We had the same problem on glaciers, is where ice would form underneath and then hollow out as it melted, so it would leave these small holes at the top that you could hit across and honestly fall down quite a ways because the hole underneath was quite a bit thicker. It's cool seeing these. I think were the only 2 vehicles that we saw that weren't related to the mine. We did see 2 convoys going in at about half a mile an hour up this road to the mines, but from what I understand, it is a fairly I wouldn't say well known, but it's a well-adventured place for kind of the gnarlier side of off-roading and overlanding. Here we are coming to the second historic mine site with these car dumps, or car stations. I don't want to call them dumps because honestly it's absolutely beautiful. All these 1940 vehicles that have been left primarily intact. we're going to take a little bit of a walk around here so you can get a better look, but it's just unbelievably cool to see this. There's a sign in the background there explaining the historic significance and kind of how they arrived here and why they weren't pulled out in the end. But all of these vehicles are now left in situ, so you can kind of climb around them. Obviously, you want to be respectful and not poke around. Absolutely no taking away of parts, but like, these things have been here for the last 70 years, and that is just amazing. Obviously, it's immensely dry in this area, so, it gets a nice coat of patina, and then it kind of just sits there. Now, the entire Canol Highway itself is about 850 kilometers, ranging all the way from Tesland at the Alaskan Highway to Norman Wells. But it's broken into two sections that you can traverse by vehicle, whether it's by motorcycle or by car. The Canol South connects Tesland on the Alaskan Highway to Ross River on the Campbell Highway. Campbell Highway is very long. I think it's roughly 500 kilometers between Watson Lake and Carmacks in the Yukon Territory, and it is extremely remote. From there, you get to Ross River, 300 kilometers from Watson Lake, and then you head north, even more remote from remote. The section that we rode is approximately 230 kilometers long. At that 230 kilometer mark, you will come across a river, which isn't that big, but it is quite deep, and you will need to fjord from that point forward. The Northwest Territories does not maintain their side of it, mostly because you can't actually get to Norman Wells anyway. You'd have to cross the Mackenzie River or have somebody meet you there and boat you across. But that being said, I need to throw in a caveat about the danger of this road. Now, from a riding condition, with the exception of those cauldron-like deficiencies in the road that can swallow your bike, there is some danger in that it is pretty bumpy, like dual sport level of bumpy. I don't know. Some adventure bikes I'd be okay with, like an 1190 or a GS or something like that, but bikes like a V-Strom or a Versys or something like that probably would be on the gnarly end for those bikes, mostly because of the ground clearance. You do hit a lot of rocks. But you do need to be very aware of the fact that you are in the genuine north here. Keep in mind from earlier in the videos is that people that built the Alaskan Highway and literally spit in every can and every corner, they thought this was gnarly and needed to get out of Dodge when they were done. So absolutely, if you're going to this area, which I super recommend because it is gorgeous, take somebody that knows how to operate in the north. I've spent a huge amount of time up in the north. I am not an expert by any measure, but I am pretty experienced, and you have to know certain things and you have to behave in certain ways when you're this far north, not only from the animals, but from the weather, the terrain. You just be cautious. I do recommend coming here. Be adventurous, be spontaneous, but be a little responsible too. And I can't believe I'm saying that out loud, but please, take this one with a grain of salt. And just because I know somebody's going to comment to it, I'm not saying a V-Strom or a Versys or whatever is not a good adventure bike. You're perfectly welcome to go down this road if you wish. I'm simply saying that you might want to have a spare exhaust, oil filter, things like that. It is bumpy, and you will get beat up in a way that the Dempster really... at this point, the Dempster is a little bit of a super highway, although gorgeous. Comparative to this, you can run across stuff that you simply don't expect here. It is very common for roads like this to be entirely washed out, to be frost heaved in ways that you've never seen before with massive cobblestones. So just be respectful in this area, be prepared. You can get through. You could probably get through with a street bike on the best of days, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. Now, what's interesting in the area that we're kind of coming into here is that we are at the north side, or the north end of the Continental Divide, and we're also up quite a ways. This area is called the McMillan Pass. It's where most of the mine sites are, and I'm going to throw in an in-video correction because it's midnight and it's a school night, and I don't want to go back and re-record. There is no cobalt in this area, but there is nickel, silver, and lead, which is the reason why this road has remained open after they kind of stopped using the pipeline in the 60s entirely. The road was maintained until 45, but the pipeline was used a small amount until the 60s. Here we are crossing into the Northwest Territories. From this point, 16 kilometers to the river, but you are in this high pass, which is also kind of, this is taiga area, which is transition between Arctic and the Boreal Forest. I love the taiga. I've spent a fair amount of time in it, and it's one of my favorite areas. For whatever reason, I'm drawn to places that have an uncomfortable balance with life. I think it's just you get to see kind of the best and the worst of how things survive, and it's just beautiful to me how the balance is achieved in such a hostile environment. We got in here. It ended up being about 20 to 30 kilometers longer than I had planned out on the map. I don't know why I didn't get the navigation quite right, but we were literally down to we were probably about 10 kilometers past my point of no return, my PNR, where we couldn't make it back out on gas. But I knew that we were getting really, really close. So breaking one of the cardinal rivers or cardinal rules of the North is I kept going because I knew that we were really close, and that is a good way to end up sitting on the side of the road waiting for a few days for fuel. This is the river that is surprisingly deep. It is not very wide, but if I had to estimate, I don't know if you can see it in the video, I would say it's probably 5 feet deep in the middle, so you would have to fjord it. I don't know if it goes down any lower on its own, but not that we could have gone any further anyway, because we were definitely on bingo fuel on the way coming back. I'm not going to state how much we have left on our fuel tanks when we got to Ross River, but not a lot is the summary version of that. And with that, I have to bring up something that had changed a lot since the last time I was in the North on motorcycle. Is I hadn't noticed that they transitioned away from having premium everywhere. When I was up here last time in 2011 or 2012 by motorcycle, there was premium everywhere to the point where you actually usually didn't find regular gas. But now, and I'm assuming it's because of the ethanol content that's been added to the premium, where it's no longer stable, so there's no advantage really to having it, is you pretty much can't get premium anywhere, which became a kind of a recurring theme on our trip, especially with James's bike that requires premium. We ended up having to run a lot of regular. In Ross River, there's no premium. There was honestly probably less than 3 or 4 stations outside of Whitehorse, and possibly Dawson in the north where we were able to get premium. So I'll also be prepared for that while you're on the go, because again, you're in super remote territory, so you might be comfortable, running a unrecommended grade of fuel when you're close to home. I can't even imagine what the tow truck ride would be here. I know in the Dempster, I think there's I thought it was a $250 dispatch fee and some like $16 a kilometer to come get you, and I don't even know the number. And you could ask the guy, but he would probably just be giggling to himself for how much money he's going to make coming and getting your sorry bike out of there for having an engine blown up accidentally. Because it'll always happen in a place like this. It won't be on the road next to a major city. And before anybody corrects me, because I know the internet brings out everybody wanting to correct everything, I am a licensed aircraft maintenance engineer, and I am fully aware that you can likely get away with running 87 gas in a premium bike, but I can also, from having done some transoceanic flights in aircrafts, tell you that when you're in remote places, weird things happen, and you're definitely going to hear it pinging the entire trip and wondering to yourself if that was really a great choice, which is one of the lessons you learn about the North, is don't test things, because it absolutely wins every time. So as we get to the end of this video, I hope it's been informational for you. It kind of yo-yoed all over the place, from funny story to history or whatever. But this was an amazing place. I honestly didn't know about it until fairly recently, but did a little bit of research and figured we could make a go for it. Kind of both being a little more experienced riders and having some bikes that were well suited for it. But it was just stunning. I mean, look at this. Can you really ask for anything more on a dual sport trip? This is the embodiment of adventure in the North American ride. And we're so fortunate to have access to this. So as we close out, I believe the next video will probably be the Dempster. I might do a Dawson one, but for sure the Dempster will be in the next little while. I'll try and put a video out about every 2 weeks, but hope you're enjoying these. I'm enjoying making them, and it's been some great memories for me and my son. This last picture here we have is our campsite at Dragon Lake. This was we did end up overnighting on the road simply because it was too long to do in a single day, but just gorgeous place. Full disclosure here, not a boat guy, but that water seems awfully close to the deck level, and even though there's not a lot of waves, it seems to be coming up. I don't really have anything to gauge whether that's safe or not against, because not a boat guy, but a little bit scary. Big river. Today's journey starts us at Dragon Lake on the Canol Road, roughly 110 kilometers northeast of Ross River, where the last video ended. If you haven't seen that video, I recommend going back and watching it. It's a very unique place that you are not going to see a lot of video footage for online. Coming out, it's with the weather being a little bit better, blue skies, the road dried up a little bit, so it's a little bit faster out, but it's pretty easy to see some of the forest fire damage that's in the area. This is going to become a recurrent theme of me commenting about how much it looks burnt, but it's very true through the north. It's astonishing how much is burnt in the last few years. I know it is essential for forest health, or at least I'm told that it is. I'm not a forest scientist. But it's alarming. Like, it's striking. The road, despite being not raining today, it hadn't quite absorbed everything, so there was still a little bit of standing water on top of the road. But it really is a beautiful ride, albeit a little bit bumpy, and granted, it's a lot tougher to ride in when it's wet. But these conditions are pretty good. It tacked up pretty well, and we got a nice little view of the river as the Pelly River next to us here that we'll be crossing. Now, to cross into Ross River, you need to use the ferry that they have going here. It's open, I think, roughly 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. up until 5 o'clock at night. But the bridge there on the left is what the pipeline used to cross over, a 4-inch pipe that they used to run from Norman Wells all the way to Whitehorse. But now it's been turned into a walking bridge. Now, I'm not sure how much traffic it gets because this place is like ridiculously remote, but it's nice that they don't just cut off access to it and turn it dilapidated. We did curiously see if we could maybe get the bikes across there when the ferry guy was gone for lunch, but that's a hard no because somebody thought of that and made sure that the stairwell was not crossable by motorcycle. Now, after we'd crossed, the guy beached the ferry on the other side, and then we were sitting there waiting for him, and he came out and kind of was giving us a grumpy look to get off there, but eventually he realized that he'd left the gate up and we would have had to like jump off of the end of it, so he calmed down and gave us a little bit of a smile. This became a very common theme through the north. We were adding what little fuel we had left because James needs premium and are supposed to run premium in his WR, and we had a long way to go. We had planned on being able to find premium in Ross River, and that turned out to not be true, so we had to jerry can him up. This is self-explanatory. Not cool, but it's neat that we kept on getting rained on even though it was blue sky. We got thoroughly soaked in this rainfall. It is, if you can see it in video, it is really coming down. In crossing to Watson Lake, doing the Canol Road and getting to Carmack's, the road direct from Watson Lake to Carmack's about 500 kilometers, and then the Canol section, we were trying to conserve the premium so that James could use it, but what ended up happening is that in this video right around here, we are coming up to Carmack's, and we came up about 20 kilometers short for James. Thankfully, I had enough fuel to get into town, but it is... from memory, I think it's the only time we fully ran out of fuel, but it became a recurrent theme. So if you're buying a bike for the north, I'd probably at this point recommend you get something that runs on 87. This is camping at Carmack's, beautiful along the river. We met a lot of people there that were canoeing or kayaking down the river, just floating. That sounded very relaxing. Not quite my speed for a 3-week trip, but pretty awesome. Now, returning to the forest fire theme, off in the distance there you can see smoke rising. I did have a lot of video showing different forest fires and so on that we drove through in the area. It's pretty active fire year this year up in this zone. Despite all the rain that we had, we just kept running into them. But it's an uncomfortable feeling when you're in the north because you don't have anywhere to go. You are on the road that you're on, and there's no side roads to escape these things. So if you come across them and you need to turn around, you kind of essentially need to have twice as much fuel as you might think because you might need to double back a longer distance than you have fuel remaining. Stewart crossing here on the right. It's kind of like, I don't know, weirdly beautiful but also terrible. All the petroglyphs or hieroglyphs on the side there on the rocks showing that we can ruin things in the north as much as we can ruin them in the south. But coming into Dawson here, I know we're rushing through this video, but this is kind of a bridge video as we prepare for the Dempster, which is the next section here. But in Dawson, you come in here, there's a beautiful welcome to Dawson half building there, but you see all of this dredged up rock on the side. I'm not sure which river it was on, I can't remember the name of it, but this is all dredged rock, so it's been run through sifters and, dredge. I'm going to keep using that word, but I'm not sure if it's toxic or not. I would hope that they remediated it, but there isn't a living organism as far as I can tell in that water, so I have my curiosity. Dawson itself, it's a cool town. I love being here. I've been here quite a few times at this point. I don't know if I'd travel the 20 or 30 hours it takes to get here by car simply to come to Dawson, but if I was going through the north and wanted to experience the Yukon, it would absolutely be one of the places that I would stay and probably give it a full day or two so that you can look around the area. And Dawson itself has done a pretty good job of keeping the buildings kind of original to the late 1800s, early 1900s, mostly the late 1800s. Here is James hanging out at Diamond Tooth Gertie's. He was unable to go in because the legal drinking age and gambling age in the Yukon is 19, not 18 as in Alberta. But It's a must-stop show. They do a PG-rated burlesque show, kind of starting at about 7 o'clock at night, but it's entertaining. But here's a little bit more of the town. I really enjoy the theme, the wood walkways everywhere, the dirt. I mean, it's probably also a lot cheaper to maintain it, but it works well from a touristy standpoint. Lots of good food, lots of good artwork and gold stuff. There is this observatory. I didn't notice that drone before in the video, but just is overlooking Dawson and the Yukon River. That is a big river. Like, it's not as big as the Mackenzie we're going to come to in a couple episodes, but that river is super moving, and it has a lot of water in it. This here is the ferry that crosses to and from the other side, where there is territorial campground. It runs 24 hours a day during the summer, so it's quite easy to transport. But like I said, short episode, bridging, but until next time, which should be pretty soon, and the Dempster Highway.
Is it funny that somebody brought a canoe on the ferry?
I guess they go faster.
So why does the feature episode of my Dempster adventure end up with us taking a road that clearly isn't the Dempster Highway? Well, it's because curiosity gets me into a lot of trouble. James, unfortunately, he's inherited that. Now, curiosity and adventure go hand in hand and usually end up with funny stories, if nothing else. So, to start the day, instead of just going up the 500 and change kilometers we were going to be doing along the Dempster, we ended up going south of Dawson City and looking for a ghost town, which, as we previously discussed, means that it doesn't exist and there's no point in looking for it. But what we did end up doing was 20 to 30 kilometers through bush like this, which ended up with a funny story, because as it turned out, about 20 kilometers into that trip in the single track up on the side of a mountain kind of south of Dawson, we met a fella that was cooking bacon in a jet boil out in the middle of nowhere by himself, just sprawled out across the trail. Thankfully, he offered us some, but honestly, it felt a little bit weird to either accept it or not accept it, so we said hi and we parted on our ways, and eventually found our way back into Dawson and then headed up to the Dempster, which unarguably would have been a better place to start the day. However, I would have missed out on the bacon story, and that'll be a memory for quite some time. Now, to save us a bunch of time and unnecessary exposition, I'm going to tell a little story here and provide some context for the video. This is important because I don't want to have to throw in all sorts of caveats along this video. Now, when it comes to Arctic adventure in North America, there are two options available to you. The Dalton Highway in Alaska, going from the Alaskan Highway to Dead Horse, and then there's the Dempster Highway, which goes from Dawson City, or approximately Dawson City, all the way to Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories. Now, there's two reasons that I'm largely going to avoid talking about the Dawson. Firstly is that it doesn't actually get all the way to the Beaufort Sea. It comes up just short in Dead Horse, and then you got to take a van. Secondly is that it's along a pipeline. And while it's not always apparent, it does kind of crisscross, or it runs parallel to the road, and in my opinion, it's just not as beautiful as a route as the Dempster. I'll also throw in there that the Dalton is a somewhat easier drive than the Dempster. It's a little more prepared, I guess would be the nicest way to put it. That being said, neither one of them is a truly wild off-road adventure anymore. It still is very bumpy. You very much do need to respect it if you don't have a little bit of time driving on gravel in the mountains or in rougher gravel conditions with washboard and kind of cobblestoney or loose surfaces. Grain of salt when you go up there. Understand where you are on a map. But honestly, it's a lot easier than it was 10 or 12 years ago. The road has been well developed. The section from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk is still being developed, although it's in a little more open terrain. So while it's got some heaving and some loose surface, overall it's in pretty good condition and relatively easy to ride from an adventure standpoint. But again, if you're not used to riding gravel, please respect it. If you don't respect the road, you will likely respect the tow truck driver. And from what I heard, it's somewhere around $300 to get them to pick up their phone and take your call, and then $10 to $15 a kilometer per direction. And this is a very remote, very long road, so you absolutely will bleed to get your vehicle back. Now, the last of the details before we get to talk about all the magic of this location is the general kilometers. Eagle Plains, which is the halfway point and the first fuel stop you'll have from Dawson City, is 420 kilometers. Thankfully, they've opened up a card lock at the south end of the Dempster that shaves about 40 kilometers off of that, so you're sitting about 380 to 390 in between the card lock and Eagle Plains. There is zero fuel between, so if you cannot go that far, plus about another 100 kilometers because something always goes wrong, please do not start. bring a jerry can. Past that, the next stop is Fort McPherson, which I believe is about 250 kilometers north from Eagle Plains, and then the next one is Inuvik, which is about another 130 kilometers or 140 kilometers from there, from memory. Inuvik itself is a reasonably large town, by northern standards anyway. And then for you to get all the way to the ocean, it's an additional 160 kilometers over the Mackenzie Delta through where you end up at Tuktoyaktuk, which is at the Bering Sea, where we want to end up. Last piece of friendly advice before we move on to the magic is tires. Bring tires or tubes, whatever you need. There is Dempster has a well-deserved reputation of slashing up tires. Again, it's better than it used to be. The shale is a little less prominent than it was the last time I was up here. However, you would be ridiculous to try this road without bringing a spare tire and the means to do it. We brought a lot of tubes because we're on small bikes. We didn't really want to carry the whole tire, so we carried tubes and patches. Also included in your spares, you should likely have a spare air filter. Chances are you can go the whole thing without swapping it out. I ended up having to because we were on a pretty dry day on the way north, and there was just too much silt, and I was riding second in line. And with all the traffic and so on, it just ended up to the point where it was pretty much clogged solid, so I needed to change it out because my bike wasn't running as well as it should be. So I made an editorial choice to split the Dempster Highway into two videos, one going north and one going south. And the reason I did that is because of the condition changes. I think it tells an interesting story going the other direction. So I'm going to save a lot of the geographic and historical information of the Dempster for the second video. And this first video is going to be dedicated to kind of trying to help you understand what makes going to the Arctic unique. Now, of all of the places that I've traveled, the ones that have stuck with me the most all share something in common. We have the Arctic up here in Canada, a variety of different places, including the Arctic Islands far north. There's Atacama Desert in Chile, Patagonia in Chile, Argentina, Antarctica, a variety of places through there, and the Sahara Desert. Now, that seems like a weird top 5 list for somebody that enjoys travel and beauty, but there's something about the balance of being in an environment like this that just makes it a unique experience. Now, my words will fall utterly short in describing what it is about these places that draws me in or that makes it a must-see experience for people, but I'm going to give it my best go. Now, you've seen from the first couple of minutes of the video that there are some amazing mountains in this area, rivers, etc. Right now we're up at kind of a high altitude plateau, and then we're going to descend down to some permafrost area in the Mackenzie Delta. All visually stunning places that are unique, that don't exist very many places on the planet, and certainly not very many places that you can get to. Now, all of those things are great and really visually apparent, and you wouldn't regret a trip where you came up here and that was your expectation. But in order to truly experience the Arctic and what makes it special, you have to stop and you have to watch and you have to listen and you have to feel. Trying to illustrate life up in here, whether it's the animals, the plants, or the people, is like looking at something that's on the edge of a cliff that's been given a millimeter by a millimeter to hold on to, and it's dug its hands in there with a ferocity but a fragility that isn't seen anywhere else on the planet, because there is no place that has such an absence of abundance for it to draw from. In the same way that most of the most memorable, most stunning art comes from people in times of struggle and in times of persistence, nature works the same way. Something about this type of area just strips away all of the noise that makes seeing the most minute things in a pure and unadulterated state. There is no cacophony of noise like there is in a jungle. There is no just overwhelming amount of movement. Everything here speaks in terms of one, but it's beautiful. It is calming and it is pure in a way you can't see in places like this because we simply don't take the time to focus on them. The environment here serves you one thing at a time, whether that thing is one animal, one plant, or one person, and there is something that is just enormously restful to me about that. It forces you to look at those things deeply and try to understand how they can survive in a place like this, how they can thrive in a place like this. How did you come to be here? How did anything come to be here? Why would it come? which are all questions that you wouldn't stop and ask about something as simple as a flower if you were in a place that had 7 million other flowers. It's not to mean that there's no life up here. In fact, it's way more prevalent than you might think. It's just less in your face. And it really does offer itself to you in a way that allows you to be contemplative about it. And what's interesting about it is that it's not limited to the plant life and the animals. The people up here are very unique as well, and share many of the same characteristics. They are both profoundly deep and fragile at the same time. Not at all weak. The people up here have always been very friendly, very open to me, but they are hardy people. And that is fascinating to me. What drives you to be that way in this environment? What's made your people stay here for this long in an environment that's clearly hostile? The best story, or the funniest story I have of how resilient people are in these areas is I was based for a little while in Resolute Bay on Cornwallis Island up in the Arctic Islands, and we were shuttling Canadian Rangers around. And for those of you that don't know, Canadian Rangers they tend to be Inuit people that are paid or participate in patrolling the northern Arctic Islands so that we can assert sovereignty up there and, kind of see what's going on, look for submarines, etc. But I remember thinking to myself, we were doing these because there was a woman that we were carrying around, and I don't know her exact age, but I guess she was in the ballpark of 50, and she was being dropped off alone on these islands. And I was thinking to myself that there's polar bears, this is the middle of the winter, so we're dropping her off I think we're in early March, so, minus 50 would be normal Celsius, which I guess would also be Fahrenheit. But we would drop her off there and thinking, in a battle of apex predators with her and the polar bear she's going to meet, I really genuinely don't know which one's going to come out on top. And, it's a comical thought because at the end of the day, the polar bear is 2,000 pounds. It's probably going to win. But I can guarantee that woman would have given him something to think about. So that is the level of resiliency up there. And that is just fascinating to me because, honestly, most of the people we meet in life are muffins. And I don't mean that to be mean. I just mean that we don't get pushed into the same environments. We don't get pushed into the same limits. And we don't get to see exactly what we are at our core. And these places, everything is like that. Everything is interesting because it is pushed to how far it can go in life. And that, to me, is beautiful. So that in a nutshell is why I find the North so fascinating. It's a subject I could talk about almost indefinitely because I love environments like this. It is just my favorite places on the planet. But enough exposition for that. So we'll finish this off. We are going to Tuk here from Inuvik. We're leaving going north. This day was punishing. It was somewhere between 3 and 5 degrees Celsius. You can't really see it in here, but we were getting wet the entire way, and we were pushing about I think it was forecast that not forecast, but it was reported at 40 kilometers an hour was the bottom end of the winds, but I think it got up near 70 kilometers an hour. And 3 to 5 degrees with a 40 to 70 kilometer an hour wind in rain and on loose gravel going north. It was a little pebbly. We did okay because we were on dirt bikes. A lot of people were really struggling with it. But we had to go. Up there on the left there, you will see what is a pingo, which is pretty neat. It is a freshwater ice heave. There's, I believe, almost 200 of them in this area. There is a national park based on them just outside Tuktoyaktuk. Here we are in Tuk. It's an interesting little town. It'll be a little eye-opening to people that haven't been into the far north. But a lot of the northern towns look like this, scattered throughout the islands. But it is a harsh environment. Technically, when you look north here, there are islands north, but I like to say that the next land is Russia. And it kind of feels like that. We'll be coming up to the shoreline here. They've done a nice job of developing kind of an erosion barrier there with some rocks, and they've put some... I believe you can camp in there now, like with a truck or whatever, but there's some picnic tables and so on that you can sit at right on the ocean. This is the northern point of the Trans-Canada Trail. I will let you look that up yourself, but if you want to see the most northern point and the trailhead, this is it in Tuktoyaktuk. Although, so here we have a little tourist backlog here. We are waiting for our turn at the sign. This friendly old couple was thankfully friendly enough to help us with a picture. But we had a rough day. James was feeling it for some other reasons, and he toughed it out through a very vicious day coming up here to Tuktoyaktuk, and this is the only shelter we could find. We tried macaroni and cheese here, but we ended up going to the visitor center, and some lady didn't specifically tell us we weren't allowed to, so we had macaroni and cheese there. It's your classic flag sign showing distance to all the different cities where people might come from visiting here. From here we went back to Inuvik for the night, but I saved a lot of the stories. I took a little bit of it in a different tack to kind of give the why of why we did the trip in this one. I hope it was entertaining for you or enlightening for you, that it wasn't just too much philosophy or me poking through. But beautiful place. It will always have a special place in my heart, not just Tuktoyaktuk, but the North as a whole. And I'm looking forward to telling some more, kind of returning to more of the normal format for the next trip. But I thought that because I could split this trip into two, or this section of the journey into two, that it would be an interesting place to kind of try to explain why you should come here and why it's unique. Whether because it is a extraordinarily long distance from most places that you would go, but I think honestly you'll see something and feel something that you don't feel anywhere else that you're likely to go in your life. So until next time, you know what? Stay warm, and the next episode should probably be in about 2 weeks. Honestly, Dempster, I've had just about enough of you messing with me. So why make a separate episode for what starts out as a sick joke about irony and long suffering and title it A Most Incredible Day? Well, because the heart of the adventure sometimes ends up like this. This is James at, I think, about 1 a.m. just outside of Dawson City. So this day of days started like any other day. We were sitting in our tents feeling sorry for ourselves after the previous day's adventure up to Tuktoyaktuk, where we got lambasted with high winds and rain and plus 3 degrees, I believe it was. And our intent was to go south. We would end up south of Eagle Plains, about a 500-ish kilometer day from Inuvik. But when we woke up, it was pouring rain. The road was closed at about 150 kilometers south from us, and again around 250 kilometers, because there were forest fires over the road and the ferries had stopped. So what we did instead is we were going to plan to just take the day to rest and lick our wounds a little bit. But what happened next, because I'm almost pathologically incapable of accepting comfort and rest, is that I checked my app one last time around noon, and sure enough, the winds had shifted a little bit, the rains had been heavy overnight, and were continuing, so the fire was pushing a little away from the road, and they decided to open the ferry for what I assume was a couple of windows to try to get the people that had been trapped up there through. And we decided to pack up all of our stuff in a super big hurry and crammed everything what we had into a bag and then headed out as fast as we could to try to get through the 2 fires before the wind shifted again. Now, what I teach my children in Word is that when you make mistakes, don't ever make 2 in a row, because the worst thing in the world is to compound. But every now and then you have a Goldilocks day, whereas if you make enough mistakes in a row, something truly spectacular happens. Now, what happened here was that we rolled the dice on being able to get through. Now, obviously, there is a ton of rain in this video. We got absolutely hammered all day long. But our plan was to get to Eagle Plains and a little bit beyond, and then camp on the side of the road. Would have been about a 500-kilometer day. But there was 3 things that kind of stop us. One is the road being closed, and then there's 2 ferries involved that had to be open at the right times, and all of them were closed as a result of the fires. So we rolled the dice that we could at least get to Fort McPherson, which was 186 kilometers south from us, which is just before the first ferry. And we figured that if all didn't turn out, that we could camp again there, despite the fact that we were absolutely drenched and all of our gear was drenched from packing it away wet. But we figured we could stage there so that on short notice we could take the ferries and push through the 2 fires. But we ended up tying everything together. Absolute pure luck. It is just one of those risks you take in the North. There is only one way in and out, and when the road is closed, the road is closed. But we were fortunate enough that for a very short window, albeit on a miserable day, we ended up getting through. When we got to Fort McPherson, we fueled up, and we were invited to a fish fry down at the river, where I think they were doing whaling at that time of year, so it's like one of those rare cases of, hey buddy, want a beluga? But friendly communities up here. I think they're more than happy to share their culture in the community with you, which I'd super recommend if you get any invites there to take it in. Very friendly people. Now, I guess I make a little bit of an assumption here, but in my time in the north, going into these communities, you can have just some amazing meeting with the people there. Community eating and hunting is kind of a thing there. So, like when you get the opportunity to try some Arctic char or some beluga or caribou stew, which I affectionately call boo stew, I would recommend it. It's a fun way to get to know the stories and a little bit of the history of the area, and you often get sent off to some cool places you wouldn't have found any otherwise. Now I can say that with the full knowledge that just like everything else in life, when faced with a brick wall and an easy pathway, I always just go face first into the brick wall. We started heading south, and when we got to our 500-kilometer mark, it was still raining. So we just kept going and going and going, and we ended up doing both days' ride in one day. But what turned out with it was just this unbelievable day of just changing conditions. We have a little bit of vision here. It's hard to see in the camera. But as we were raising up to the plateau around Eagle Plains and then going through these passes, we kept going in and out of the cloud layer, and it was thick on thick. When it pours up there, it's, from my experience, a little bit different of a rain. It just sits in a super dense fog, and somehow you're wet inside. Your rain gear kind of acts more like a bucket than rain gear. So you're soaking wet, you're cold because it was only a couple of degrees. And as you can see in the video here, it did progress into a much sunnier day, but that was only this is probably about 600 kilometers south from Inuvik before we really got clear of the rain. So 600 kilometers in rain and cold is a long day, but man, the visions that it created, like with the crazy lighting and the going in and out of the cloud, it was just an unbelievably magical day. Now, what's funny with these adventures is that what makes them memorable in a lot of ways isn't just the spectacular scenery like the Tombstone Mountains here that we're crossing through. It's the pressure to go through things that don't go right. We started out the day, I wouldn't necessarily say sour, we were a little bit worn out and pretty cold. But we were committed to going and trying to make the best out of it. But as the day went, despite the fact that the conditions weren't really getting much better, we found that we were just kind of really into it. We found just a solid groove, and the beautiful scenery that you wouldn't have seen normally chosen to have gone through conditions like that ended up being the highlight instead of a drawback. It was just phenomenal. It's been one of those days that since we've gotten back, it keeps coming up in the discussion, is despite it being this, I think we ended up riding roughly 14 hours that day. I think we got into Dawson around 2 or 3 in the morning, which is a phenomenally long ride for anybody. And, full credit to James. He has been riding, bikes for a long time, but he's only been a road rider for about a year and a half. And to do an 800-ish kilometer day in treacherous conditions, in a couple of degrees weather, and he was just hammering it. He was in the zone through the day, and by the time it was 8 or 9 at night, it didn't really feel that way. This is honestly probably 8 or 9 at night showing in the video, but we just had smiles on. Man, we stopped in next to a river. There'll be a picture coming up here of us standing next to it, and we were eating our trail mix and drinking our drinks and jet boiling everything we could jet boil to try to warm up. But it was just serene, surreal. It was an amazing day. So I guess as a tie-off to that, I'd say, like with adventure riding, don't be afraid to challenge the conditions. You always have to be safe. That's primary concern. But more often than not, the days that I didn't feel like starting are the days that I remember as just being irreplaceable. Now returning to more of a travel-oriented dialogue here. What is the Dempster Highway? Well, it was first proposed in the late 1950s. Like everything else that happens in the north and in remote areas, there was oil and somebody wanted it. So they started a road to get to the oil fields down near Eagle Plains, but they quickly found that those fields weren't going to be viable, so it was abandoned. And then in the 1970s, the government decided that we were going to assert our Arctic sovereignty by having a single road up in there under the "I licked it, it's mine" theory. And they completed the construction all the way up to Inuvik. Now, the Dempster Highway itself crosses over 2 mountain ranges, the Ogilvie and the Richardson mountain ranges. However, from having been through there a few times, I like to say that there's actually roughly 4 distinct mountain ranges there. I don't know how they separate them. I really haven't taken the time to learn, but they are, you'll see in the video here, is they have kind of a grassy meadow type, a tombstone style where they have caps on them, these weird gravel ones, and then what I would call kind of a Nunatak style, where they are large mountains with what looks like they have blades coming out of the top that are often, 500 to 1,000 feet tall. Now, I've previously alleged that I am in fact a geographic nerd, so I will preface that by saying the Nunataks in most of the ones that I can see here aren't associated with a glacier, but they do look very similar with them, so I feel comfortable making the allegation that at some point they probably were associated with a glacier. Now, I will say that the road that goes through here is unique in a lot of ways because it goes through mountain ranges, through meadows, through taiga, and then through Arctic plains and Arctic delta. Now, obviously, to cross over that many different terrains, there was an enormous amount of construction challenges. This road is quite often elevated, anywhere from, and there's got to be sections that are 30, 40 feet in the air, and some that are significantly lower, but they had to deal with the permafrost up there. Most of the ground here, despite having grass on top of it, actually has an icy layer underneath as you dig down. In my previous video from 2012, I think I have a picture of inside an ice freezer where you can see where the permafrost lays out, where each year's dust is kind of compacted in, and it makes almost like a tree ring sort of a thing. But they had to elevate the road to get it above the permafrost so it wouldn't heave. Now, obviously, with such unique conditions and problems to deal with, you end up with some very interesting places to look at. This scene here and the next video, it's near Tombstone, or the Tombstone Visitor Center. It's probably about 140 kilometers from Dawson City, or 80 to 100 kilometers once you're heading north on the Dempster. Now, Tombstone is gorgeous. It's one of the highlight things and the things that they advertise. A lot of the posters for the Dempster you will see are in the Tombstone region, but it's one of the most beautiful places, and you can see in the video there that there is a double rainbow. You can almost hear the angelic music in the background. It was almost comedically beautiful going through this area. It will be a memory that I never forget. So here we are crossing the famous bridge that starts the Dempster, except we're exiting the Dempster. This is the two fuel stations as well. Now, it's hard to sum up how crazy this day was. I wouldn't say it spiraled upward. It was an incredible experience, one that's really hard to put to video. It never quite captures it the way that you see it, but honestly, it's hard to forget. Now, you'll see a picture here in a second of what we look like. It was also pretty rough. There is no denying that. We were soaked, we were dirty, and we did take the next day off in Dawson City, and quite honestly, we full on deserved it. It was a mess. We needed to do some maintenance and some cleanup. Everything was jammed full of everything. But we did stay in Dawson, and from there we head out over top of the World Highway, which I think will be maybe not this great, but pretty great as well. Well, here we are starting day 16 of the trip. We are in Dawson City in the Yukon after our monster voyage from Inuvik down to Dawson in a single day through the rain and a little bit of sunshine at the end. I wanted to include this clip of us leaving towards the top of the World Highway, getting back on the ferry, because in a previous video I boarded this ferry and there was a little bit of water coming over the front, and I wanted to illustrate to everybody that that's not a normal experience, although honestly probably pretty normal for sailing people, though I clearly belong in the air and not in water. Now, this is a little bit of a weird episode because I think when we had our day off here in Dawson, it finally dawned on us that we were actually headed home. Now, when I say that we were headed home, we were not headed home the same way. We are taking an entirely different route on the way back, with the exception of only about a 10-kilometer stretch. It will all be road that we haven't been on yet. And by road that we haven't been on yet, I mean over 3,000 kilometers of road we haven't been on yet. So, going home is a little bit of a matter of perspective because we are a long way from home. So all of this video takes place over a 2-day journey for us that took us from Dawson City in the Yukon over top of the World Highway down to the Tetlin Junction near Tok, Alaska, and then down through Kluane National Park to eventually Haines in Alaska. Now, the top of the World Highway is a little bit of a weird experience to talk about. The camera, I mean, it shows beautiful footage, and here you can kind of see the size and scale of it, but it's a weird case where you're up on top of the mountains the entire way through this road. It's 281 kilometers from Dawson City to the Tetlin Junction, and probably the first 160-ish is up on top of these mountains, or very close to them. And as far as I can tell, it was made in the 30s and 40s on the US side, and eventually in the 50s on the Canadian side as kind of a gateway into some of the gold areas. But predominantly it's used as a tourist road at this point, and it's not hard to see why people would come to this area. We're here in July, there's still snow on the side of the road. You are a ways up. I don't think that the border crossing here is the highest in the United States, but if it's not, it has to be pretty close. you are a ways up, and it is honestly probably the most picturesque border crossing that I had seen to date, although later in this video we will cross down to Haines on the Alaskan Panhandle, and that is also a beautiful border crossing. But the fellow that worked up here on the American side, he really loved his job. The scenery there is unbelievable at the border crossing. Now, unfortunately, we can't record it there, but I would have loved to have shown a picture or a video of us going through it, as it was absolutely beautiful. Now, this road that connects from Dawson City to Chicken is gravel. It is 3 to 4 lanes wide. Honestly, it was in excellent condition, much like the Dempster when we were up there. It can get a little bit slick when it gets wet, so buyer beware if you are there in inclement weather. But the roads are not the old roads in the north, and any reasonable vehicle will be able to get through with just enough time and attention, and just driving according to conditions. So well worth the trip through this area. I know it's kind of remote, but as we're coming up to Chicken here, you can't miss going to Chicken. There are so many things that we could talk about with Chicken, most of them inappropriate. They really do truly lean into the whole chicken thing, but it is worth stopping simply because it's a little bit of a comedy. Now we'll circle back to the miles of the trip afterwards, but the distance from Dawson City to Chicken is entirely on gravel and is approximately 170 kilometers. Now, Chicken, as you can see, this is pretty much the entire town. They do truly lean into this whole chicken idea. I'm not sure what the joke is, but I'm sure it's hilarious. As you can see, they have 2 giant roosters. We're just going to leave it at that. And they have these little signs like laid in Chicken, Alaska. And, obviously you need to take pictures of that. It's a little bit of a famous stop. And inside the store, they have all kinds of chicken paraphernalia, stuff that I would have never thought of. Now, the road out of Chicken is about another 100 kilometers before you get to Tetlin Junction, and then I believe probably about 10 kilometers to the west. You can get into Tok, Alaska. Now, I worked in Tok, Alaska for a couple of months doing a project maybe 10 years ago. And my fondest memory of that place is that one of the visitor boards has a picture from, it looked like the 1950s, of the mayor riding into City Hall or a city building on the back of a moose. And honestly, that's a pretty memorable thing, so super cool. From there, we headed back down towards Kluane National Park, and initially we were planning on tenting probably about 100 kilometers over the border into the Yukon, but we weren't able to because my app once again disappointed us with a tenting spot that they had marked that was non-existent. And at that point, it was starting to get dark, which was a new experience for us after being in the 24-hour sunlight. But it was pouring rain for the last 4 or 5 hours that day, and eventually we just ended up in Destruction Bay, and we stayed the one night in the motel that we did the whole trip at the Talbot Arms Motel, which honestly, great food there. I've stayed there many times before, and I enjoyed every time. It's a very uniquely Yukon experience. Now, this stunning lake to the left is far more stunning when it's daylight outside, but it's a Emerald Lake, Kluane Lake, beautiful, beautiful, and glacier fed. It is right next to the, I'll try to pronounce this as Techal Dal, park or visitor center. And off to the side here, which you'll see a picture of in a second, on that mountainside, there's 2 distinct Dall sheep family where you can set up in this visitor center and take the binoculars and peek up into there and look at them when the cloud's not obscuring them. Although, quite honestly, it was pretty beautiful with the clouds there on this day. Now, one of the things that this makes this my favorite area is Mount Logan. So I'm going to nerd out here for 30 seconds because it's my video. Mount Logan is in Kluane National Park, and it is a gigantic mountain. It's the second highest mountain in North America and the tallest mountain in Canada at approximately 18,000 feet. It's slightly shorter than Denali. But what's neat about it is that by prominence, which is the distance that you can see of the mountain, or from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain, is 17,200 and some feet. For reference, those of you that have seen Mount Robson, which looks gigantic in person, the prominence is 9,281 feet. So Logan stands alone with no shoulder mountains at almost twice the height of Mount Robson. Now, you can only see it from the air, unfortunately. You can hike into it as well, but there was no way for us to get there by bike, which is, well, probably good, but it's also unfortunate. But I've seen it from the air many times, and it sticks an entire mountain range above the mountains around it. And here we are at the Chilkat Pass. Cool place. Kind of strange scenery, as we'll talk about here in a second, but it's fairly high altitude. Lots of snow still on the sides of the roads, but also phenomenally green. I don't know if it was just because of the rain or not, but here's James practicing safety with his fully loaded lightweight bike. He's getting much better at wheelies. I've been riding a long time now, and I am demonstrably terrible at wheelies. I can do them all the time when I'm racing on my race bike, but for whatever reason, just total brain cramp when it comes to road bikes. Now, this area is pretty remote, obviously being between Haines Junction and Haines, but it's beautiful in its own right. I'm not sure what you would call the terrain up near the top of the pass, but as you're coming down, you're going to see that we have a whole pile of these towering mountains on the right-hand side of the screen, or on the west, that are snow-covered. And what's weird about it is that the left-hand side, or the east side of the mountains, is not snow-covered. And I know that the sun kind of works that way with it setting in the west, but it ended up with this really cool effect where half of it seemed really cold, the other half seemed very tropical and kind of west coast rainy. But once again, obviously, there was no day that we could go through that we didn't get rained on, and it was pretty cold when we were up here. It was down near zero from memory riding through. And with the winds and so on, honestly, it was getting a little tiring. This is like, it's day 17 on it now, and being wet and rainy for the 17th straight day, it was tough, but the scenery in this area was beautiful. And something unique that I hadn't really seen before with the northern coastal mountains. Last time I was up here, we didn't get this far out near the coast, but I was very glad that we'd added it in. Now, what was different about this area from my previous trips through is honestly almost a complete absence of large wildlife. We did see a lot. I mean, we were out there for 23 or 24 days, so we did see lots of bears and moose and elk and things, but not as many as I normally would. And I don't know if it was just an off year for them, or whether maybe being there in the midsummer, they were off in different areas feeding, but it was a little bit different because normally this area is just polluted with animals. As you can see here, we came down from the pass down to sea level to get into Haines in Alaska, and the mountains were very, very interesting to me. They got returned to, it's a little bit different than the west coast down in Vancouver area, but honestly, it made me think of Hawaii. I know that a lot of people will say that it doesn't, but it's kind of these just straight up mountains out of the ocean and just covered in trees. It was very rainforesty in there. You'll see a picture of our camping spot at the end of the video, and lots of ferns and just moist as anything, but Haines itself is a cool little town. From what we were told from the people that live there, is the people that actually live there live in Haines, and the ones that are more tourist oriented, where all of the cruise ships are, live in Skagway. You can see my legs hanging off the bike there. We were pretty tired. You know what, we were having a good time, but like any time you spend 10 or 12 hours a day on a little dual sport, eventually your legs start to hurt, and so does your butt. But Haines itself is a beautiful little town, a little expensive for my taste, but it is impossible to deny how picturesque it is. I love the ocean. I love seeing where the freshwater and the seawater meet. Love ships, love boats. So it was just an incredibly cool little town, and very clean. Obviously, it's got some tourist legs for it, but it was just it was a nice change from all the time that we'd spent through the interior and up in the north. It had not been friendly at the Northern Ocean, so it was pretty nice that we got down to the south, where things were a lot more reasonable and kind of calm. So we ended up staying in Haines overnight, and once again, my app let me down a little bit. The spot that it sent it was not supposed to be used by people on motorbikes or cars, and that wasn't included in the information. So we ended up going a little bit north from Haines into a place called Salmon Run Campground, I believe. It'll be coming up here in a second. It was a really nice campground. It was the most expensive by far that we'd paid, but it was a beautiful place. The scenery was amazing. Looking out over the sound, and as it turned out, the owners of this place were both from Edmonton, which is right next to St. Albert in Alberta, but they'd been coming up here for the last 5-6 years and now own the campground, and honestly, that'd be a cool retirement business in my opinion. So until next time, we will be finishing out the series next week with the Skagway trip, White Pass, a little bit of White Horse, and then Liard Hot Springs, and I'm excited to share the last little bit of the trip. It's been a really cool adventure, and I've really enjoyed sharing it with you guys. You know what? Some riding days are just that perfect little zone. You find yourself in the pocket. Perfect day, perfect scenery, perfect distance. And this was one of those days. And it's hard to believe that this is where we are. I think this is day 18 of the trip that we're starting on here. And this is the last episode of this series. And we'll be covering out the last 4 or 5 days of the trip that we've been gone. And it's hard to believe that when we add up this series, that we've been gone for 23 days. It's unbelievable how much stuff we've seen. This here is Chilkat Lake, which is a little bit north of Haines, Alaska, where we left off in the last episode. Chilkat Lake is a beautiful little recreational park or recreational area that is broadly known as one of the most beautiful lakes in Alaska, and it lived up to its name, although we were promised grizzly bears, and there were not any, so I was somewhat disappointed by that. Filling in its place was this ferry ride from Haines, Alaska to Skagway, Alaska, which, from what I understand, is the Disneyland of the Alaskan cruise adventure. When we came into port here, there was 4 or 5 far larger ships that were sitting in harbor, and the little town was just packed. Actually, kind of reminded me of a Banff or a Jasper sort of a setup. But leaving out of Skagway, going northbound, we are climbing up into the mountains. What we will be spending the next few minutes in here is the White Pass. Now, I'd say that I'm not one to pass judgment, but clearly I am, and I'm going to hit to this even though it's a little bit of a under-the-belt sort of an attack for Alaska. There is an unusual number of places in Alaska that are called Dead Horse this or Dead Horse that. This is called Dead Horse Pass. Go to the north at the end of the Dalton, Dead Horse again. Now, from what I understand, it all comes back to this idea that they went there, they were ill-prepared, winter kicked them around a little bit, so they ate a horse. And for some reason, they wanted to celebrate that and just called everything Dead Horse. Now, it's easy enough to look back on that and laugh at this point. That's a little bit odd, but it does give you a pretty good indication of how often that was a problem here. Although, I will state for the record that I don't remember there being a dead horse in the Yukon, so maybe they just did it better. Now, I have to send a quick thank you out to somebody that suggested in my pre-launch video that we add Haines and Skagway into our trip, and I did because it sounded interesting once I looked down on the map. And the road down into Haines, as we covered in the last episode, is beautiful. It goes along a fjord and a river, and you get to see the mixing of the salt water and the fresh water, but just beautiful with the trees and the towering landscape. And then you take the ferry up to Skagway. From the Skagway, you're taking this White Pass, or Dead Horse Pass if we want to get into it, all the way up to White Horse, and it's just this scarred terrain, this gigantically wide valley with just almost flat bottom, but it looks like some kid was playing with a Tonka truck and just kind of putting things in cool little piles and making waterfalls, and then added food coloring to all these lakes. It reminds me a little bit of the coloration of the ink lots in Banff, but the high mineralization was suggested to us that it wasn't great to drink from, but thankfully we had filtration, so we did anyway, because it's like that lake there that we were looking at. You could see the bottom for like a mile out. It was incredibly clear and neat. But you could stop at one of 7 million lakes along this way, and you wouldn't have been wasting your time. Now, we've been on the road at this point by 19 days, and we'd been eating a whole pile of peanut butter mixed with oatmeal for our breakfast, so I took the chance there to take one of the fascinating little cultural restaurants in Whitehorse. It's a great place cuisine-wise, but Burnt Toast Cafe is highly recommended. This is Emerald Lake, which is about 45 minutes south from Whitehorse. The blue coloration there comes from a combination of calcium chlorate and marl, which I had to look up what that was, but apparently it's another kind of carbonate. It also makes the water very hypoxic, so even though it's beautiful, there is hardly a living creature inside of it. This park here is one of my favorites. I've spent a significant amount of time in Whitehorse working out of it, and it is Miles Canyon, so if you get a chance when you're in Whitehorse, definitely check that out. Lots of cool trails to go down. In the background there, you will see a bike that is under a cover and a gentleman in a tent there. I won't describe who he is in case he finds this video, but the interesting story around this is that bike is a Super Tenere, which is roughly a 550 or 600 pound bikes. And for reference, our bikes are about 300 pounds. Twice in the course of 48 hours while we were there, while trying to turn around the bike jumped him and ended up pinning him to the ground. So for those of you that are thinking that big adventure bikes are the only way to do this, that is not true. Our bikes are half the weight of that. We did this trip, did it spectacularly, and my bike didn't jump me at any point. So think about it before you get the big bikes. It's not the only way to do this. As we were coming south out of Whitehorse to Watson Lake and then down through the Alaskan Highway to Dawson City, you'll see a ton of wildlife, particularly around the Muncho Lake area. As you cross back into BC and northern Alberta, there's buffalo off to the side there and another herd here. I don't know if I've ever been through this area where you don't end up driving through a herd of buffalo, but they're very sedate. But one of the highlights you have when coming back down is Liard Hot Springs. This is one of my favorite places in Canada. This whole area is a hot spring wetland, and it's been, as you can see, it's prepared so that it kind of still stays natural-ish to what it would have originally been. The water comes out of the limestone off to the right there, and then it goes down this river into two separate pathways that kind of get continuously colder as you get further away. But it's one of the coolest hot springs that I've ever been to. Absolutely worth stopping in. Now the road from Watson Lake down to Fort St. James and eventually Fort Nelson is just absolutely beautiful with so many things to see. This here is the beginnings of Muncho Lake Provincial Park, which leads into Stone Mountain Provincial Park. But Muncho Lake here on the right is also one of my favorite places in Canada, mostly because it's a very, very interesting motorcycle ride. It is basically perfect pavement for about 10 kilometers, just riding along the coast of this, or the shoreline of this stunning lake. In the right light, it's kind of an emeraldy color, but even when it's not great light, it is just transparent. And at the end of it is this beautiful place. There is a lodge at the north end. Don't stay there. There's a place in the south here that looks like it's probably shut down and dilapidated, but it's this cool little motel with a restaurant that I believe is called Jack's. It is the best 1950 diners with an old angry guy running it that I travel into the north. Has his own eggs and meats that are made there, and just provides just a beautiful, great breakfast, and you get all of the sass that you could possibly swallow with it. So I hope you see this video, Jack. Every time you offend me, but it is awesome, and I say that in jest. I love your restaurant and your motel there. As you can see here, our luck did not improve with the rain. Our rain escalated into heavy rain, and then it escalated into hail, which you're going to see here. It's funny, those guys flashing their lights think they're warning us about the hail, but they have no idea the hail that they were going to be coming into the other way. That hurt. Those were probably, they weren't quite golf ball size. They were probably about half the size of a golf ball, but when you're doing 100, 110 kilometers an hour, that hurts. For those of you that are wondering if the bikes would make the journey without any problems, James here is holding the only carnage from an OEM part that died on our trip. His clutch cable blew up outside of Fort St. John, and we were able to fix it before we continued on. But sure enough, it was during the rain, because it was always going to be during the rain. But it just adds to the adventure, so that's good. Now we're getting to the end of the adventure here. We're coming across the prairies and getting back to the St. Albert, Alberta area. But there will be a synopsis kind of in a follow-up of how this trip went, and more of just a sit-down style. And I'm going to compile this into a movie just because I've never made something this long over this big of an adventure. But I do need to send a big thank you to my wife for permitting us to do this. It's been a dream of mine for a long time to take my kids up to the north, and I am looking forward to doing something like this similar in 2 years with my daughter. So just thanks for joining us, and we will see you in the movie. But also thank you to everybody that's been sending encouragement in the comments. It's been much appreciated.